How's it going, my dudes? Welcome back to another video. So we are going to talk a little bit about Dark direct attack damage. I'm sorry it took a little bit more time than I expected to create this team, because I tried to play around with several different lineups. So I started using Carla as the lead, but I didn't really like the fact that she was a bruiser. So as you can see over here, she's a bruiser. That kind of defeats the purpose of being in a direct attack team, in my opinion, because as soon as your power flip goes off, which is likely going to go off because you're having penetration, you're going to hit the boss a lot of times. If your bruiser power flip goes off, you're going to bounce off the boss instead of going through the boss, and therefore I decided that a warrior power flip is going to be a lot stronger. So I settled with Viron. However, I do feel that possibly Momia could fit the role a little bit better, even though Momia has slightly poorer leader in terms of attack power. So Viron has 65% to attack for dark units, but Momia has only 40%. However, don't forget that Momia also comes with a whopping 35% extra attack to every single dark unit on your team, so that kind of adds up a little bit. So I didn't really test this part out, but I think that Momia could perform a little bit better. Yes, I know Viron does have extra damage to dragon types, which is very good for the Lightcrest Serpents right now, but it only benefits himself, and I don't really like selfish direct attack buffers unless you're really going full selfish attack, such as running a Remnith. And another reason why I'm using Momia is because when Pierce is active, this unit actually does double direct hits, which effectively doubles our direct attack damage, and on top of that you add another 20% total damage dealt. So she is going to be pretty useful for a direct attack team. So we're just going to stick with this for now, and I'm going to show you how this team works. It is performing pretty well, but to be honest, I expected a little bit more. However, do take note that the Lightcrest Serpent is immune to debuffs, so this team is not going to work so well because Carla and New Year's Yuel, they both use poison, and your team does more damage when the enemy is poisoned. So unfortunately over here, with all the dark resistance debuffs that we have, or the poisons that we have, they amount to absolutely nothing. It's kind of a sad thing. And like I said before, it is also very difficult for you to use a direct attack team on the admin boss. So I'm not even going to try using this team on admin advanced, and admin is also just advanced. We won't be able to get a really good idea of how powerful this team can be. So I decided that, hey, you know what, I'm just going to get a couple of my Discord friends to just remove the buffs on the boss and see how much damage we can do, how fast the runs can be, and I'm going to compare it with a Belcidia comp. But before we begin, yes, there are some characters here that you may not have seen before. Number one, you've probably not seen Adil, even though I've talked about him quite a few times. So Adil, he's basically just a mini Viron. He buffs attack for himself and he grants Pierce to all allies, which is pretty good, and he also lengthens the attack buff duration on himself by 20%, which is very important because we are running New Year's Yuel, right? And New Year's Yuel has this ability too over here. While attack buff is or active for this unit, you plus 20% attack to the party. Adil's attack buff kind of like dissipates into the rest of my team, which is very nice because direct attack teams tend to rely on every single unit being high in damage output. This is very different to pen flip teams, very different to skill damage teams, and very different to combo based builds. And not only that, we are going to be using Xion over here. Let's take a look at what Xion does. So he flings daggers in front and behind, inflicting dark damage, reduce dark resistance, and Maya on hit force for a period of time. So Maya is basically just slow. And his first ability, every 30 times a direct hit is dealt, you add 10% to the skill gauge for this unit, so you're going to ramp up a lot more skills this way. And his second ability is not going to be so important because every 30 times the ball launches out of flippers, you pierce for 3 seconds. That's not a big deal for my team. We are running 3 different piercing teams on this lineup after all. And I really like his main, but we don't have enough slots for this. So you add 7.5% to the damage for dark units dealt against foes with dark resistance debuff. That is not bad. So without further ado, let's take a look at the team in action. Thanks Hu and John Cena for joining me on this run. Let's take a look at this team in action. We are going to remove all the 4 buffs at the start. Therefore, before Carla finally takes her turn, the boss will be left open and we can poison the boss and hopefully land some dark resistance debuffs from Xion as well. Do take note that I'm not showcasing a certain co-op team strategy or something like that. I'm just using these 2 allies of mine to help me remove the buffs so that we can land some debuffs. It is very important to understand that this team relies heavily on debuffs, which unfortunately is such a shame that these dragons are immune and you have to get rid of the buffs first. And dark units just cannot get rid of buffs. Why? So I'm a little bit salty, but I do feel like they could have just released a unit that gets rid of buffs and be dark type at the same time. Otherwise, it's just so difficult to build a Carla at this point in time. But I'm getting off topic and losing track over here. So as you can see, we are landing a lot of piercing buffs. Every single unit, Viron has piercing, Adil has piercing, Carla has piercing. We should constantly be on piercing and therefore triggering all the direct attack damage buffs that we're going to get from our armaments. So sometimes you can see damage go up to about 150,000, but that's only with a full slew of buffs and debuffs on the boss. So this team is working out pretty nicely for me. I like the fact that Viron actually spins through the boss whenever I land a power flip, so that also helps me to land a lot of direct hits, and that's where the bulk of my damage is coming from. But I guess after testing direct hit for myself, it kind of seems a little bit sad. Like, If you do not actually bounce into the boss, then you actually kind of waste a lot of precious time. But as for skill damage teams, it's very straightforward. As long as your skill is within range, you're gonna hit the boss. It is the most regular of archetypes after all, and that's why skill damage is always gonna be my favorite. Nonetheless, let's take a look at the runtime. And it is not important how fast we cleared this run. I want to compare this to the Belsidia team, and that's my priority for this video. Because we want to make sure that we can do better than before. If not, there's really no point over here. So 1 minute 30 seconds. And now on to the typical Belsidia team. You already know what this team is all about. It is basically the Enmity One Punch team. And I have a few comments for this team, okay? So at the end of this run, you're going to notice that the run times are pretty similar. I would argue that probably Belsidia is going to be a lot better for this because Belsidia doesn't really rely on removing the buffs, and especially the immunity buff on the boss, which is a pain in the ass, especially for team building. But one very important thing that I noticed is that Belsidia tends to die a lot. So sometimes, if you're unlucky, you may wipe. I have actually wiped a couple of times using a Belsidia team, so that boils down to luck a little bit. So as you can see over here, my Belsidia is close to death, and I think she is gonna die in this run. But she's gonna be revived really soon because we have a bunch of power flips, we have a bunch of AoEs over here, so that's not too much of a problem. I think the main issue really starts to come when, for Belsidia teams, the weakness of this team is with all the homing energy balls that the boss summons when he is below 50% HP, because that will absolutely wipe out your Belsidia. Now do take note that we are also benefiting a little bit in our DPS because we do have the dark resistance debuff. So that is also going to add on to our output. And as you can see over here, we just got revived. So we are still good to go. And I think my allies are trying to communicate to you guys to like the video if you haven't already. But I'm just going to go ahead and skip to the end if you don't mind. There is nothing much to watch over here. So let's take a look at our timing this time around. It will be 1 minute and 34 seconds. So pretty similar to the direct attack team. But one would argue that this team actually relies on less net 5s. And that's an absolutely valid argument. But nonetheless, this will be the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, it really helps the channel. This has been free to play by the way, and as always, I will see you in the next video.